Thanks very much, Eva. So, good morning and good afternoon, listeners. It's my great pleasure to be able to present to you today. I think the emphasis will probably be today more on questions than the presentation, given the unusual circumstances over the last 3 months for our shareholders. So I fully appreciate that, and appreciate there must be some degree of frustration in our refinancing. However, as we've made clear on a number of occasions, the voluntary suspension that we've been in has allowed us a much better position in which to negotiate new funding for a major project. So we appreciate your patience and your understanding, and we're doing our very best to look after shareholders and to negotiate a new deal for financing that will take the company forward successfully. So hopefully that message comes across today, and we certainly haven't been sitting still. There's been a lot of progress on other fronts as well during the last 3 months. So if you could just turn to the second page, please, Eva.
Yes, agenda.
So it will be the typical agenda for those of you who aren't familiar with the format for this short presentation. We'll focus on commercialisation schedule, corporate and finance, research and development, manufacturing and collaborations, and then the financials that underpin our quarterly report. So next page, please, Eva.
Yes, highlights.
So as a summary, I'll run quickly through the highlights. So we achieved our quarterly Technical Advisory Board milestone of a 10% PIN performing module on a steel substrate, which is very important for our activities in both the UK and Soliance in the Netherlands, where we're seeking to solar functionalise steel substrates principally for roofing. We achieved our Department of Industry CRCP grant payment by virtue of achieving the milestones, and was paid $343,000 in the month of June. We've also now achieved the next quarterly set of milestones and expect to be paid a further $343,000 in the month of August from the Department of Industry. We have now, as we've now finished the full financial year for 2018, we are now expecting a rebate from the Australian Taxation Office in the vicinity of $3.4 million. Unusually, it is a little more difficult to estimate that this year, given changes to the rules, but I'll expand on that a little later. As I foreshadowed earlier, we still have not completed our refinancing, but negotiations are reasonably mature in that respect. We had a very strong year in sales, and they were up 20% year on year, and that part of our business now is predictably profitable and growing. So more profit and stronger sales expected again next year. And we've also had the excitement of introducing a new potential steel partner who's currently doing due diligence on our activities at Soliance and in the UK for potential commercialisation of our steel substrate-based technology. But more to follow on that as well. Next page, please, Eva. And again.
Commercialisation schedule.
So I'm sure it comes, commercialisation schedule. So I'm sure it comes as no surprise that this is now unfortunately delayed by virtue of the fact that we've had our activities, particularly the activities that relate to the scale-up of the glass substrate through the prototyping activities scheduled for Clayton in Victoria, jointly with CSIRO. With the delay to our financing of that project, I would have to say that at the moment that would be moved 1 year to the right. It's with regret that I forecast that, but until we've actually completed the financing, there's no point in updating this schedule formally. But clearly, it will need to be reviewed and revised. Next slide, please, Eva. And again.
Yes, page 7.
So this is slide 7. This is slide 7. So we've been keeping the market reasonably well informed. So at the moment, our schedule for updating the market on our refinancing activities is typically fortnightly, and of course, with a more comprehensive explanation through the quarterly updates. So the simple candidate for refinancing our activities with a minimum investment of $10 million has been a group in Turkey, which was introduced to us by our long-term partner, Güneş, formerly known as Nestle. So Güneş introduced a group called the CER Group, which is a large private company based in Istanbul with a lot of activities both in Turkey and also in surrounding countries, in both in construction and also the provision of energy infrastructure. Those discussions have been ongoing. However, the deadlines that we've set for those discussions have been exceeded. So we've now gone non-exclusive on that particular financing, and while it remains a candidate for potential investment, we've had to go cast a wider net to make sure that that we have plans B, C, and D in place, which of course we can now do on a non-exclusive basis. So there have clearly been some issues confronting the CER Group in terms of making this investment. We had the Turkish election towards the end of June, which meant there was a full restructuring of the ministries relevant to these activities. And probably more importantly, there continues to be a major depreciation in the value of the Turkish lira, which is and seems to be providing some hurdles to the free flow of capital in and out of Turkey, which directly affects us. And that's the message that we've been receiving from CER Group, and that's the one that we have to accept. It's a source of major frustration, and as I said, because of delays and beyond what is considered to be any reasonable expiry date on this potential subscription, we've gone now to further afield and are now in discussions not only with potential investors here in Australia, but also our strategic shareholder, Tasnee. So that's opened some very interesting discussions, and it does, they have been positive. And as we said in the quarterly, it's with great delight that we are now back in discussions with New Mooney, which is an emerging Australian investment group with significant plans for investment in Australia in both food, water and energy. So there are a number of collaborations there with universities in South Australia and also the South Australian government directly. And we've now joined that in a sense that they have offered us an opportunity for setting up a demonstration plant also alongside those other activities. So there's quite a lot of detailed planning supporting this potential investment from New Mooney, and New Mooney assures us for the first time in several months that a lot of the regulatory hurdles that they needed to overcome to attract the investment for these major infrastructure activities have now been overcome, and they are reasonably confident of again securing significant investment by the end of this month. And that investment would be a minimum of $10 million, but potentially as much as $14 million into us. So the terms haven't been finalised in terms of the price, but that is the minimum amount of investment we need to attract in order to begin our MAD fit out and also equipping, and certainly that will attract a minimum of another $15 million from various grants that we have on offer, thereby providing a minimum of $25 million or as much as 30, which will easily take us to the end of calendar year 2019. So with the forecast refinancing by the end of this month, we're feeling very confident of translating or transforming the company from its startup status to a more mature company, having de-risked the technology through the successful completion of the MAD project. And as I said in the past, this is what we consider to be a very significant opportunity to grow shareholder value, taking this effectively from the laboratory to the factory. So our partners, such as the CSIRO, have been extremely understanding through this process, but we haven't wasted the time, and in the past 3 months, particularly with the evolution of the PIN architecture, we've used that to improve the quality of our planning for this project, both in terms of the fit out and the provision or procurement of new tools for the successful prototyping line. So we'll actually be meeting with CSIRO tomorrow at the Department of Industry to further advance these discussions. All of these groups have been particularly supportive of our situation, and we are the lead technologists in the group, so we are indispensable in that regard. So we remain very hopeful and confident that this project will commence in the near future. In relation to perhaps less important, but nonetheless part of our company activities, was the very pleasing results for the FY18 in terms of sales growth. So we manage sales out of our Italian office, with most of the materials and equipment being manufactured here in Queanbeyan in Australia. Sales grew by 20%, and it's become quite clear from our growing database of customers, which include the likes of Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford, Princeton, Fraunhofer, the major Korean universities in particular, that we now have a dominant market share in this high-grade, low-volume specialty chemicals activity that we engage in for the support of research and development into the field of perovskite solar cells. So that's very exciting for us, and we're very pleased to achieve that. And that business now is consistently profitable, and I'd expect next year, given the fact we have a very well-established fixed cost base, that it will be increasingly profitable. Some of the corporate and financial messaging is we still remain extremely hopeful, and most recent discussions with a wider group of potential strategic investments into the MAD project all look very positive. More broadly, in the last 3 months, we've also had, as I suggested earlier, incoming interest for our steel project based in Reliance from one of the world's largest steel manufacturers. And here in Australia, we've had incoming interest from both China and India, from some of the largest solar companies in those companies, in those countries respectively. So there's no doubt that we remain at the forefront of we look forward to being able to fire up that project with the receipt of a minimum of $10 million over the next month or so. So again, thanks very much for everyone's patience. So we'll move on to the R&D sector.
Yes, slide 9, R&D.
So in relation to our external technical advisory board milestones, we tend to share them between various projects, principally steel and glass, but also across various performance milestones, and sometimes in relation to the scale up of various processes, because one of the most important accomplishments as GreatCell Solar as a company is the fact that we are focused principally on the industrialization of this technology. And while a lot of the academic research focuses on things purely in relation to conversion efficiency improvements, we cast a much broader net, understanding that in order to achieve industrialization, that we need to be able to make panels at significant scale that are comparable to existing technologies in the first and second generations, but also to be able to substitute more expensive materials with cheaper materials in order to keep costs down. Also, we need to use manufacturing techniques which are cheap and scalable. So, for example, all the materials that we lay down on our effective material stack for the conversion of light energy into electricity are laid down by solution-based processing. So we use either screen printing, inkjet printing, or slot die coating, which are all common deposition methods where we use our key materials depositing in solution or solvent and then drying off to produce a dry photoactive surface, and then finally encapsulating that for long life. So that's in essence what we do. There are very few companies in the world that focus on that, and many of our milestones are really directed towards those durability challenges. We're very, very pleased to report this month that through Soliance and our subsidiary in the United Kingdom, based in Manchester, that we are now achieving 10% efficiencies on modules based on steel substrates. Now, steel substrates have unique challenges. They're effectively what are known as backlit devices. And this is somewhat challenging, and of course it is uncontested. We see no potential opposition for this product, and we're very excited to be pushing on with this level of performance. I'd also draw your attention, if I may, to a report that came out about a week ago in relation to the so-called tile roof that Tesla had been promising to deliver about 12 months ago. The report was out last week, again suggesting further delays to that product. Now, that's a particularly challenging application to achieve, and I think it once again upholds our approach to the functionalisation of large roofing steel in what is typically described in Australia as colour bond or in Europe as colour coat. So we remain convinced of that, and as I said, we've now attracted one of the world's largest steel companies to work with us in some early due diligence for potential collaboration. That does not mean that we've discarded Tata, but as you well know, Tata's had its own challenges, but we expect those to be somewhat relieved, if not eliminated, with its current merging with ThyssenKrupp in Germany. But we haven't sat on our hands and waited for that to happen. We've responded to incoming interest from alternative companies. So from what I can see, there seems to be some nice competitive interest emerging for the use of this technology on roofing steel. And this follows on from really what was developed during the Tata days as the concept of turning buildings into power stations. And we still believe it resonates very strongly with a lot of potential stakeholders. So that was very exciting, and we thank the Technical Advisory Board, chaired by Professor Gratzel, for approving that milestone. Moving on, there's been a lot of local activity in perovskite solar cells in the last 3 to 6 months, and we've now entered new collaborations with both UNSW, famous for its work in silicon technology, and also Sydney University in the same collaboration, which is funded by a $365,000 ARC linkage grant, which is focused on building integrated photovoltaics for use in long life windows using perovskite solar cells. We're also involved in a similar but more significant project in Melbourne, where we're partnering with Monash University, one of the leading Australian universities in the field of third generation PV. So that's also supported by ARENA and the CSIRO and Viridian, the glass subsidiary of CSR Building Products. So that's a larger project in the vicinity of $2.3 million. So it's, I guess it's an accolade for us to once again be chosen as the lead industrial partner to work with premium Australian universities for further investigation into this technology for use in building integrated photovoltaic products. Of course, we've always described that as the Holy Grail, but it's some way down the track, we believe, for the purposes of commercialisation, and our initial target is something which we consider to be relatively low-hanging fruit for the use of this technology in solar farms, going head-to-head with first and second generation technologies. We've also done particularly well in Europe. Recently, we've announced the award of grants known as Spearhead, which is part of the Graphene project, and also Apollo, 2 separate Horizon 2020 projects in Europe. The total funding available from those 2 projects to us is in the vicinity, it's 1.2 million euros or 1.9 million Australian dollars. So I guess you can see from the receipt of these funds in particular that that is why we've been able to function very well and get on with our day-to-day activities in the absence of any significant refinancing, because our burn rate diminishes significantly with the assistance of these various grants, which go towards our activities both on glass and on steel in Australia and in Europe. And of course, the principal grant that we're seeking to light up, I guess, with the introduction of the $10 million in our current round of fundraising is that $6 million provided by ARENA, which is largely underspent at the moment, although we did receive a payment from ARENA of $150,000 during the quarter, and we, having completed further work in relation to that work schedule, we're expecting another $673,000 from ARENA during this current quarter. Durability testing for the better informed is typically around satisfying the tests that relate to IEC 61215, which is now the uniform industry standard for accreditation across first, second and third generation technologies. We're very excited to report that we've now satisfied those tests on cells for the 3 key elements of IEC 61215, which is thermal testing, light soaking testing, and also UV stability. So that's very exciting, and I guess vindicates the fact that we've now elevated PIN architecture to the principal candidate for commercialization, and also the architecture which we'll be introducing to the MAD project. So that's very exciting, and I guess there's another reason why it's sometimes dangerous to leap in too early to commercialize emerging technology. Having exhausted a lot of work on porous carbon architecture in the previous year or two. So PIN is now the emerging technology for commercialization. It's proving to be extremely durable. It's proving to be extremely reproducible and scalable. So it, in fact, ticks all the boxes. So we're very excited about that. If we can move on, please, Eva.
Yes, slide 11.
Page 11.
Page 11, yes.
So, as you know, we have a close relationship with Soliance, based in the Netherlands, and we have employees stationed there and in the UK to work exclusively on the key challenges for the commercialization of perovskite solar cells on steel substrates. And a lot of the work that's been achieved in the last 3 months in relation to those durability accomplishments that I've just touched on was achieved at Soliance. So that's a very effective collaboration, because Soliance is particularly well provisioned with significant tools and capital resources, and those machines are absolutely fundamental to us in scaling up this technology. So for a relatively modest fee, we actually gain access to that platform, and it's allowed us to leap ahead, particularly in relation to work we do on PIN on steel. The other major project, of course, is the MAD project. It goes without saying that there has not been any physical work done on that at Clayton in Melbourne in the last 3 months. However, there's still been a lot of work done in relation to further planning on the fit out and the design of the building, and also the design of the prototype line. That has been necessary as we're now actually going exclusively with PIN. So there has needed to be some adjustments, but time put in now in relation to that will be time saved in the future, and it will allow us to hit the ground running once we've refinanced. I think we've already made the point in relation to some of the long lead items for that particular prototyping activity. We've already commenced orders to minimise any of the time that we have lost through the delays that we've incurred during this voluntary suspension. Moving forward, once again, please, Eva.
Yes, page 13.
Just touching on the all-important. That's page 13. So just touching on the all-important financials. So I'd like to draw your attention to the very low net burn rate for the last 3 months per month. So only $210,000 per month, taking into account the significant grants that we have enabled to reduce that, have been awarded and allowed us to reduce that burn rate. At the end of the quarter, we had approximately $500,000 in the bank, but we also have a significant number of additional payments from grants to draw upon over the next quarter as well. So we feel comfortable about maintaining business as usual, and of course we'll be anxious to receive the $10 million to fire up the MAD. And the MAD at the risk of repeating myself, is a very different project to those that we've undertaken historically as a company, because it's very lumpy in terms of the capital expenditure. So it's not the typical hand-to-mouth milestone-based funding that we've engaged in as a company that's been listed since 2005. This is the first time that we've invested significantly in capital expenditure, and therefore that requires a lot of planning. It requires a larger sum of money, and probably most importantly, it means engaging with the best available to de-risk that exercise. And I haven't mentioned VDL Enabling Technologies Group of the Netherlands, with whom we've been doing a lot of this planning, but they remain a collaboration partner. And of course, it's our collaboration with them which has attracted so much confidence and support from governments in particular when awarding the grants that will allow us to move forward. So we've always been very focused on risk management, having witnessed a number of major disasters over the years in terms of scale up from potential competitors, so we don't want to fall into the same trap. So while it may sometimes cause delay and frustration, it's better to arrive in one piece rather than to be dead on time. So that probably concludes this brief presentation, and I'd be very happy to take questions from the floor if those questions haven't been answered in this short presentation. So back to you, please, Eva.
Die erste Frage, the first question would be, which consequences do we expect for the commercialization schedule due to the funding delay?
Well, I can touch on that, but I did address that earlier on. As I say, until we actually complete the refinancing, it would be wrong to predict the precise impact on the commercialisation schedule. But we have lost 3 to 6 months with this delay, so I would imagine that as a minimum we will lose somewhere between 3 to 6 months. But as I say as well, we haven't wasted the time. We'll hit the ground running and hopefully be in a position to catch up on lost time. But when we do receive the additional funds, we will make a formal announcement and recast the commercialisation schedule and do our very best to stick to it.
Mm-hmm. And is it possible that TESS will increase its strategic shareholding?
Well, that's an interesting question, and thanks for asking it. TASMI, as you may be aware if you follow shares more generally, is in the process of selling its titania business, known as Cristal, to an American group called Tronox. That particular transaction has come up against some regulatory hurdles because of concerns about concentration. So that's delayed that transaction, and TASMI are not really in the position to know at the moment whether it will retain Cristal or whether it will successfully sell Cristal to Tronox. So TASMI provided us with a statement towards the end of last year saying that TASMI would retain its interest and it wasn't the subject of any sales, which was very comforting. And TASMI has retained a seat on the board and still has Dr. Rob McIntyre as its representative on the board. So I don't see TASMI diluting, but I also see TASMI in a situation where it's unable to fully appreciate its desired exposure, given that major transaction and the sale of its titania business remains uncertain. So until that's clarified, I would imagine, given my discussions with its deputy chairman, that it will remain invested, and should we ever, for example, get into a situation where we undertake a pro rata type transaction to raise additional funds, then I would see Tasnee wanting to maintain its percentage shareholding. So that's all I can really tell you about Tasnee. We are in discussions with Tasnee at the moment, just because we like to keep them informed, and they have asked us to provide them with any proposals should the proposed funding out of Turkey or the proposed funding out of Australia not come to fruition. So they do remain an important strategic investor and a potential safety net for us as a company. So that was the reason that they were originally introduced, and it's good to see that they are being loyal to their commitment.
Thanks so much. And there is one shareholder, he would like to get some more background information regarding New Muni and the possible money which might come from them.
Sure. Listen, a good question. New Muni is a newly formed company. It's formed by a well-established Australian businessman by the name of Mr. Alan Campbell. Mr. Campbell's been a major innovator in new energy in Australia over the past 15 to 20 years. He's now left his former employment in the coal seam methane gas industry, looking to form new projects in the area of food, water and energy. Australia, of course, is a perfect place to be working on renewable energy. We have an abundance of sunshine, we have an absence of water, and we have an opportunity to export very heavily into the Asian markets who don't have the benefit of a considerable land mass that we have. So we hope to be part of all of that, and I do know that the new fund that he has sought to establish, which is a multi-billion-dollar fund, has got pre-approval in relation to investing into Greatcell Solar. So once his money arrives, we can expect an immediate payment because the due diligence has already been completed in relation to the investment into us. And we haven't, the only thing that hasn't been completed is the term sheet for that investment. But they're a friendly party and we expect to be able to accomplish that in a reasonably short period of time. So we're looking forward to that.
Thanks so much. And this is an R&D question. One shareholder would like to know, you spoke in your last quarterly report about working on long-life Windows SPV devices, and he would like to know how realistic is it to produce translucent windows in the future?
Well, I think it's very realistic. The biggest challenge, there are two challenges, and let me address them separately. The first challenge is technically that the more translucent or even transparent that a window is, the less light energy that is captured and the lower performing the device is. So in relation to inventing translucent devices, it's a real trade-off between performance and the transmissivity of the light. So I think there will be a limit to how high performing a translucent device might be in relation to a window, but I think anything above a 6 to 8% performing window would be commercially viable. And I also am very thoroughly convinced that as an early stage, early adopter product, it would have an enormous following, particularly from the architectural sector. Quite regularly, we have incoming inquiries from architects wanting to understand the status of these projects. So it's not a core activity for us. It's a non-core activity. which fortunately is heavily supported by the involvement of academic institutions like UNSW or Sydney University or Monash University, and heavily subsidised by grants. So we're very comfortable with these projects. We do believe they can be accomplished, but I think everyone has to be realistic in relation to the performances that may be achieved. The second point I'd like to make about building integrated photovoltaics in general, particularly on more expensive buildings, is that they will attract significant risk in terms of long life products until the long lives have been amply demonstrated. I would believe that there will be a significant additional cost in terms of warranting these products. So I see BIPV as something that will emerge over the next 5 to 10 years, but I don't see it as an early stage product unless it's done in small quantities just to service the architectural industry. Our principal goal, of course, is opaque devices where we expect to go head-to-head with first and second generation technologies, because principally our technology is cheaper and more versatile, we believe, than the existing PV devices in solar farm applications.
Thanks so much. And we have a shareholder, he would like to know more about your potential manufacturing partner. He is asking, could you give us some more background information regarding the potential products or objectives?
Listen, we've always been cautious about wanting to partner too soon with manufacturing partners, and we've learnt that lesson from having partnered closely with Tata during the time of the GFC, and also with Pilkington North America during the period of the GFC. As you will remember, both of those companies experienced significant contraction during that period when all non-core activities were essentially eliminated from their R&D portfolio. So Tata, of course, has never really recovered from that position. Tata UK, up until very recently, was a $1 company, having been originally purchased for 8.3 billion euros. So that in itself exposes the dangers of being involved in the building products industry and not getting your strategy right. So really we're focusing on building intellectual property, we're focused on building a prototype, and after that we believe that the prototype will sell itself. In the meantime, of course, we are maintaining dialogue on a non-exclusive basis with a number of international PV developers, namely in Korea, China, India, and also Europe. But if we were clever, we would be creating some sort of auction so that we get the best value for the entry price of any new collaborators, to maximise the money that's been invested on behalf of shareholders in this technology. So we're not rushing into this. The prototyping project will probably take in the vicinity of 12 months to complete, 6 months of commissioning, and then 3 to 6 months of actual production. And at that stage we expect to find the sweet spot for entering more commercial discussions with potential manufacturing partners for both glass and then ultimately steel-based products.
Thanks so much. The next question is regarding the expected revenues for 2019, and especially which revenues do you expect in which segments for 2019?
Well, it's certainly not my policy to comment on revenues, but one, because forecasting revenues is really beyond the ability of the company at the moment, given the fact that there are still significant uncertainties in relation to the timing of our progress. However, I would make the point, with the emerging interest in this technology, we have recently taken a very close look at the idea of upfront payments from potential collaborators to based on various potential licensing models, i.e., or for example, initial payment plus long-term royalty stream. And I believe, again, that these sorts of revenues would be possible to secure at the completion of our prototype MAD activity. So we're certainly not promising anything, but within 12 months, I do believe that this potential earnings stream would be a possibility for reducing the level of burn within the company and ultimately, of course, moving into positive cash flow.
Mm-hmm. Thanks again. One shareholder is asking, can you tell us something about the planned, the joint venture and the status quo within Jinko Solar?
Jinko, listen, we remain in a relationship with Jinko. It's non-exclusive. Jinko, if you look at its recent share price activity, is feeling the effects of the intense competition in the first generation market, which is growing, but not generating significant profitability for the major participants. So in effect, that really provides even greater motivation for Jinko to look at newly emerging technologies. So when the time is right and we feel comfortable with the progress that we've made with PIN devices, then we will again be exchanging information with Jinko. But you should not see Jinko as our sole entry point into China. In recent months, other potential collaborators have emerged, so we'll keep in close discussion with all of them, ensure that we strongly protect our IP, and look for the best potential commercialization deal for our shareholders as our MAD project comes to maturity.
Mm-hmm. Then a further question out of Melbourne. Would you please ask Richard to explain what a PIN or PIN is and the benefits?
Sorry, a PIN what?
A PIN, what PIN is and its benefits.
PIN, okay. Certainly. So you must appreciate that we have 20 PhDs, most of them material chemists, working for us in this field, so it's highly specialised. But I can give you some basic understanding of the material stack that we use. Most importantly, this particular material stack doesn't use titanium dioxide or mesoporous titanium dioxide. It uses a new class of materials known as a perovskite, and typically a cocktail of perovskites, meaning the original formula was essentially based on methylammonium lead iodide, but we've found that we've achieved much greater stability by using a cocktail of those particular compounds. We also use something known as a hole transport material, a hole being a positive charge, and quite importantly, over the development of this technology, we've substituted organic hole transport materials with inorganic hole transport materials. So you will see that from time to time there are new world records set for PIN devices. What is important to understand that it is only the ones that have largely inorganic content are the ones that are suitable for commercialization. Inorganics are much more able to stand up to the debilitating impact of the sun's rays, whereas organics may give you very high performances in terms of conversion efficiency. The devices typically do not enjoy long life. So again, that really sort of gives you a better understanding of what we do, particularly as a company, and how we're always looking at new materials to substitute to produce longer living devices. So we use a whole transport material, a perovskite, and a conductor, typically. The stack may vary between 4 and 7 different layers, and the total thickness of the stack for a PIN device is somewhere in the vicinity of 500 to 600 nanometers. So you might compare that with a porous carbon device, which was one that we were developing 2 to 3 years ago, which was many magnitudes thicker, in the vicinity of 10 to 12 microns. So the exciting thing about the much thinner stack for the PIN device is the fact that it's potentially translucent, that it uses very little material and therefore is very cheap. And also it's able to be applied to flexible substrates because, if you like, it can bend with the wind because it is so thin. It's also very versatile in the sense that it outperforms first and second generation technologies because it performs very well in real world conditions. So the difference between performance in the laboratory relative to real world studies is much less different. And in fact, that's what we describe in relation to PIM technology as having a very high energy yield. And we've done a lot of real world testing both here in Australia and in the UK, which fully demonstrates that with data that we've collected over the last 12 months and beyond. So that's what a PIN device is and does. The P comes from the word acceptor and the N comes from the word donor. And we no longer discuss materials in terms of being negative or positive. We discuss them in terms of either giving up an electron or an accepting an electron. And you have materials involved in that stack which are charge selective. They're either hole charge selective or electron charge selective. And this is a whole new language that's been introduced because of the exciting developments in third generation PV. I hope that helps answer your question.
Thanks so much. And maybe due to the time, the last question for today, and there are still plenty of further questions and we won't be able to answer them.
Very happy to answer any. We're very happy to answer any other questions offline in a written format for publication, either on the website or on one of your sites, either. So no question will go unanswered.
Yes, I will send afterwards all the questions to Richard, and they all will be answered. Maybe the last question for today. GreatCell mentioned new equipment offerings, including a new Hyperon LED solar simulator. Could you give us some more background information, please?
Well, I'd like to, most importantly, and he'll never forgive me if I don't refer you on to him, but I have a head of sales who resides in Rome in Italy, Mr. Luca Sorbello, so he'll be very happy to provide you with the specs on our new LED solar simulator. The most important aspect of this new LED solar simulator is that it's significantly cheaper than the existing solar simulator offerings in the market. One thing that's important to understand in relation to solar simulation generally, that you need to replicate the impact of the sun. both in terms of the temperatures it generates, and in terms of the nature of the wavelengths that it generates as well. So it's quite challenging to do that in a way that perfectly replicates the sun, but we finally got a device which I believe retails somewhere in the vicinity of $40,000 to the customer, and you've got to think of that in the context that historically solar simulators were perhaps a magnitude in cost greater than that, so probably in the $500,000 range. But I have heard of solar simulators for larger devices that exceed several million dollars in value. So this new device is really targeted at the academic community, which will enable it to do flash testing, for example, which is very important because the only true way of testing the performance of any device is to leave it in the sun for 12 months and measure the amount of energy in and the amount of energy out. But of course we need to work much more quickly in terms of measurement of performance, particularly in the R&D community. So this will be very helpful in accelerating the level of activity for R&D in the field of third generation PV.
Okay, thanks so much. Es ist jetzt 10 Uhr hier in Deutschland, it's now 10 a.m. in Germany and 6 p.m. in Sydney. Ich darf mich ganz herzlich für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit bedanken. Thanks a lot for your attention. Richard, your last words.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for their ongoing interest and support of the company, and I hope to be able to deliver on our promises sooner rather than later. I'd also like to draw your attention to our newsletter that was published today, which will give you a broader understanding of some of the topics that we could only touch on briefly today. So look out for that newsletter, and if you haven't received it, please register for our database online on the Great Cell Solar website. And I say good morning and good evening to everyone.